He fought for 6 years. 6 years of depositions, of legal fees, of watching the company that had stolen from him continue to profit while he waited for justice. And when the jury came back with a $22 million verdict in his favor, he walked out of that courthouse and felt, for the first time in 6 years, like the weight had finally come off. He had no idea the weight was just about to change shape, because the person he trusted with everything he had just won was about to steal it. Welcome to Corporate Chaos Scandals, the place for the most shocking and unbelievable workplace confession stories. From office drama to hidden secrets, nothing is off limits. Before we get into this, make sure you subscribe and like, because we bring you stories like this every week. His name is Dante Bell. 38 years old at the time this story reaches its conclusion. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, in a family that was not wealthy, but was not without ambition. His mother, a teacher, his father, a civil engineer. 2 people who had instilled in their children the conviction that education and application were the mechanisms by which a person shaped their own life. Dante had taken that conviction seriously. He was a software developer, self-taught in the initial stages. He had been the kind of teenager who took computers apart to understand how they worked and put them back together in configurations that improved their function. He had later formalized his understanding through a computer science degree at Georgia Tech, after which he had worked for a series of companies before deciding, at 31, that the thing he wanted to build was his own. The intellectual property in question was a proprietary data compression algorithm. He had developed it over 3 years of evenings and weekends while working a day job, the kind of disciplined, unglamorous creative work that rarely makes for a good story, but makes for a significant outcome. He had documented the development process from the beginning, which turned out to be the most consequential thing he did. Dated notes, time-stamped files, version histories, the full technical paper trail that proved, unambiguously, when the algorithm had been created and by whom. He had filed the patent correctly. He had completed the process, paid the fees, received the documentation. He had then licensed the algorithm, or believed he had licensed it, under a carefully structured agreement, to a technology firm that had expressed interest in integrating it into their product line. What the firm did instead was integrate it without completing the licensing arrangement. They had taken the algorithm, embedded it in a product, and brought that product to market. Over the following 4 years, that product generated in excess of $90 million in revenue. None of it touched Dante Bell. He discovered what had happened through a conversation that he has described as one of the stranger moments of his life. A former colleague who had moved to the company mentioned the algorithm in passing, described a compression technique at the core of their product, and the description was specific enough and accurate enough that Dante understood immediately what he was hearing. He went home that evening and pulled out his documentation. He spread it across his kitchen table. He looked at the dates and the timestamps and the patent filing, and then he called an attorney. The litigation took 6 years. It was expensive. The legal costs alone consumed most of his savings and required a financing arrangement against the potential judgment. It was exhausting in the way that multi-year litigation is exhausting for individuals who are not companies with legal departments. The constant attention it demanded, the discovery processes, the depositions, the motions and counter-motions, the periods of apparent inactivity that were actually periods of dense back-channel negotiation that his attorneys managed and that Dante had to trust them on. There were multiple settlement offers. The first was insultingly low. The second was better, but still a fraction of what the jury would ultimately award. His attorney advised him on each one. Dante, who had spent 3 years building the algorithm and 6 years fighting for it, declined them. On a Tuesday morning in April, after 4 days of jury deliberation, the verdict came back: $22 million. His attorney shook his hand in the corridor. His parents, who had driven up from Macon for the verdict, were in the gallery. His mother cried. His father put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You were right to fight." Dante drove home. He ordered food. He called his mother twice more. He sat in his apartment, the same apartment he had been in for 3 years, because the legal costs had made moving anywhere nicer a non-priority, and thought about what came next. He had $22 million coming, the first time in his life that sentence was true, and he had no idea what to do with it. Here is something that financial advisors, wealth managers, and the full apparatus of the money management industry understand very well, and that nobody bothers to communicate clearly to people outside that world. The period immediately following a sudden, significant financial event is the most dangerous period in a person's financial life. Not because of bad decisions made in excitement, necessarily, because of vulnerability, because of the specific gap that opens up between having money and knowing how to protect it. A gap that in generational wealth is filled by transmitted knowledge and established relationships, and that in first-generation wealth is filled by whoever shows up first, with the right credentials and the right manner, and offers to help. Dante Bell was not a financial person. He was a developer. He was extraordinarily good at his domain. He had spent years building something with precision and defending it with tenacity. The management of a significant lump sum financial award was not his domain. He knew this. He was at least self-aware enough to know that he needed professional help. He was referred to Evelyn Morgan through a professional networking contact, not a close friend. A professional acquaintance who had used her for a less significant matter and described her as competent and thorough. That was the full extent of the due diligence. Evelyn Morgan was 44 years old. She had a real license, real professional qualifications, a real office in a real building in Buckhead, the kind of office where the furniture communicated stability and the framed credentials on the wall communicated authority, and the assistant at the front desk communicated that this was not an operation anyone needed to worry about. She had real clients whose assets she managed competently. She had managed her own financial life, her house in a neighborhood she had stretched to afford, her tastes that ran consistently ahead of her income through a method she had been refining for 18 months before Dante walked into her office. She called it active portfolio management. The relevant authorities called it investment fraud. For 18 months, Evelyn Morgan had been fabricating investment statements for a small number of clients whose wealth was substantial enough to skim from without immediately triggering scrutiny. The statements she showed these clients were detailed, professionally formatted, entirely believable documents describing portfolios that performed at realistic, if flattering, rates. The accounts the statements described did not contain what the statements claimed. The difference between what they contained and what the statements showed was flowing into Evelyn's accounts, and into the house and the lifestyle and the gap that always needed filling. None of her previous clients had noticed. The amounts she had skimmed from each were calibrated to stay below the threshold of obvious. She was patient. She was careful. She was, in the specific technical language of financial fraud, a sophisticated operator. Dante Bell, with $20 million to invest, and no existing knowledge of how investment management was supposed to work, was not just her next client. He was the largest opportunity she had ever seen. Their first meeting lasted 90 minutes. Evelyn listened carefully, asked intelligent questions, and developed a clear profile of what Dante wanted: conservative growth, diversified risk, income from returns rather than capital depletion. He was not looking for aggressive returns. He was looking for safety. He said this explicitly. He said, "I spent 6 years fighting for this money. I don't want to take risks with it." She said, "That's exactly the approach I'd recommend. Conservative, diversified, long-term. Your capital protected. The returns steady. We grow this over decades, not years." He transferred $20 million into the account she specified for his managed portfolio. He kept $2 million in his personal account for living expenses and a modest lifestyle upgrade that he had been, frankly, earning for several years. The monthly statements began arriving. They were impeccable. They showed a portfolio performing exactly as Evelyn had described it would: conservative growth in the equity positions, steady income from the bond allocation, appropriate diversification across asset classes. The numbers were specific. The formatting was professional. The accompanying commentary was knowledgeable. Dante read each statement. He compared them to the previous month. Everything looked correct. He had no framework for knowing whether the specific numbers were right because he had no experience of what right actually looked like in practice, which was, of course, precisely the vulnerability that Evelyn had identified. He trusted her. She had given him 14 months into the relationship, nothing that warranted anything other than trust. The money, in the accounts the statements described, was not what the statements claimed. It had been, from month 1, being managed the way Evelyn managed it. A portion maintained to cover potential withdrawal requests or sudden scrutiny, the remainder moving through the network of entities she controlled and into the life she had decided she deserved. By month 14, she had extracted from Dante Bell's $20 million, conservatively, carefully, over 14 months, approximately $12.8 million. The first letter arrived at Dante's apartment on a Thursday. It was from a brokerage firm, one of the institutions listed on his monthly statements as a custodian of his portfolio assets. The language of the letter was precise and institutional. It described a past due balance on an account associated with his managed portfolio. It requested action. Dante read it twice. He did not understand it on the first reading. The second reading produced a growing, specific unease that he was not yet able to name. He called Evelyn. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice was exactly what it had always been: composed, authoritative, reassuring. She told him it was an administrative error. These happened occasionally between custodial institutions and management accounts. She would resolve it directly with the brokerage, and he would see the correction reflected on next month's statement. He accepted this. He trusted her. He put the letter in a folder and moved on. 6 weeks later, a second letter, different institution, similar language, past due balance, funds outstanding. He called again. This time, before she answered, he noticed something: the ring count. She answered on the 4th ring instead of the first. It was nothing, possibly nothing, probably nothing. But it was different. Her explanation this time was slightly less smooth. There was a fraction of a pause, barely perceptible, before she began. She cited a clearing delay between institutions. She used technical language he could not fully evaluate. She was still convincing. He almost called his attorney. He had the number in his phone. He opened the contact, looked at it, and then closed it. The discomfort of the possibility that something was wrong was still, at that point, less than the discomfort of the process that confronting the possibility would set in motion. So he waited. 3 weeks after the second letter, a third arrived. This one was not from a brokerage firm. It was from a collections agency. Dante Bell put the letter on his kitchen table and sat with it for 20 minutes. Then he picked up his phone and called his attorney. His attorney, a man named Charles Osei, who had litigated the intellectual property case with him for 6 years, and who Dante trusted more than almost anyone he knew, listened to the account of the letters and said 2 things. The first was, "Don't call Evelyn again, not until we know what we're dealing with." The second was, "I'm going to refer you to someone today." The someone was a forensic accountant named Dr. Patricia Wyatt, 53 years old. She specialized in financial fraud investigation. She had done this work for 30 years. She asked Dante for full access to every document, every statement, every email, every contract, every communication between him and Evelyn Morgan since day 1. It took Dr. Wyatt 12 days. The picture she assembled was detailed, precise, and comprehensive. The statements Dante had been receiving were fabricated. The portfolio they described did not exist in the form described. The custodial accounts did hold some assets, enough to provide a veneer of authenticity if a client performed a basic check, but a fraction of what the statements claimed. The rest of the money had moved, through a series of entities with generic names and minimal regulatory filing histories, into accounts that Dr. Wyatt traced to Evelyn Morgan's control with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had seen this architecture before and knew exactly where to look. Of the $20 million transferred into Evelyn Morgan's management, $7.2 million remained in accounts that could be verified and recovered. $12.8 million had been extracted, moved, spent, and converted into a life. The house, the car, the consumption of a woman who had decided that the gap between what she earned and what she wanted would be filled by other people's money. Dr. Wyatt presented her findings to Dante and Charles Osei in a conference room at Charles's firm on a Wednesday morning. She went through it document by document. When she finished, she said, "This is a complete financial fraud. There is no ambiguity in the evidence." Dante looked at the documents spread across the table, at the numbers, at the trail of $12.8 million. He was very quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do we do?" Charles said, "We do everything. Criminal charges, civil recovery, regulatory reporting. We pursue every avenue simultaneously, and we do not stop until every legal consequence available under the law has been applied." Dante said, "How much do we get back?" Charles said, "The $7.2 million in recoverable accounts we get. The rest, I'll fight for everything I can. I can't promise all of it, but I can promise she faces everything." Dante said, "Then that's what we do." The criminal case was filed first. Evelyn Morgan was arrested at her office on a Friday morning. The arrest was reported in the business press that afternoon. By the following Tuesday, 3 additional clients had contacted the investigating authorities to report concerns about their own portfolios. 2 of them had also been defrauded at smaller scales. The pattern was consistent. The method was identical. Evelyn's defense attorney argued during pretrial proceedings that the investment losses had been genuine, that the markets had performed poorly, and that the statements, while imprecise in their presentation, reflected genuine if poorly communicated investment outcomes. He argued this with a straight face in front of a judge who had reviewed Dr. Wyatt's report. Dr. Wyatt testified for 2 days. She was, Charles Osei said afterward, the most effective expert witness he had seen in 23 years of litigation. She walked the jury through the architecture of the fraud with a clarity and a patience that left no room for alternative interpretation. Number by number, account by account, entry by entry. Evelyn Morgan was convicted on 9 of 11 counts: wire fraud, investment advisor fraud, theft. She was sentenced to 8 years. Her financial advisor license was permanently revoked. She was ordered to pay restitution of $7.2 million, the amount in the recoverable accounts. The $12.8 million. It was gone. Spent over 14 months on a life that had been built on stolen money. Reduced, in the assets available at the time of arrest, to a house worth less than $3 million, a car worth $40,000, and various personal possessions that the recovery process cataloged and liquidated. Dante Bell recovered $7.2 million of the $20 he had entrusted to Evelyn Morgan. He had gone in with $20 million. He came out with $7.2 and the full weight of what trusting the wrong person had cost him. In the months after the conviction, Dante did something that took more deliberateness than it might appear. He refused to define himself by what had happened to him. He had fought for 6 years for the original judgment. He had refused to be the person that company's theft had tried to make him, the person who gives up, who settles for less than justice, who accepts that the powerful can take from the less powerful without consequence. He was not going to be defined by the second theft either. He took the $7.2 million to a national bank with a private banking division. He requested a relationship managed with full transparency, every account statement independently verifiable, every investment in regulated, publicly visible instruments, every fee explained in plain language before he agreed to it. He was not warm in that first meeting. He was thorough. He asked more questions than the private banker had been asked by anyone in recent memory. He then hired, from the recovered funds, a financial literacy consultant who worked with him for 9 months on the foundational knowledge that the 6-year litigation and its aftermath had made urgently necessary. He spent 9 months learning what he should have learned before transferring a single dollar to anyone. He has continued developing software. He launched a company 18 months after the conviction, smaller in its initial scope than what he might have built with $20 million intact, but built on a foundation he understood and controlled. Within 2 years, it had its first profitable quarter. He became involved, through a connection made during the investigation, with an organization that provided financial literacy resources specifically to first-generation wealth holders. People like him, who came into significant money without the generational framework for protecting it, and who were therefore disproportionately targeted by the specific type of fraud Evelyn Morgan had specialized in. He has spoken at events they organize. He has contributed to their policy advocacy work. He said in one of those appearances, 2 things were stolen from me. The first time, I got justice. The second time, I got 7.2 cents on the dollar and a lesson I didn't want to learn. What I'm trying to do now is make sure the lesson is worth what it cost. Evelyn Morgan is currently serving her sentence. She has, by all accounts, maintained throughout that what she did was wrong, but that the circumstances that led her to it were complex. Dante Bell does not comment on her circumstances. He does not have the energy to spare for it. He is busy building something. That is the story of Dante Bell. The $22 million victory, the advisor who stole it, and the man who refused to stop fighting, twice. Drop a comment below. What would you have done when that first letter arrived? And what do you think about the financial system's responsibility to protect people who come into significant money without the background to navigate it? This one matters beyond the story. get into the comments. And if you are not subscribed to Corporate Chaos Scandals, right now is the moment. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, share it with someone. We bring you stories like this every single week. I'll see you in the next one.